Hi, I know I'm just a cat, but I believe in kindness. If you click subscribe under this video, you'll make my day.
There's a particular kind of silence that creeps into a room right before someone tells you something they know will break you, but they're too much of a coward to say it straight. That's the kind of silence that filled my mother's kitchen the morning she told me they were leaving for the annual family trip without me. She was buttering toast like it was just another Tuesday, not like she was gutting her oldest daughter without blinking. She wouldn't look at me. Not once. Just kept her eyes on the countertop as if the truth would hurt less if she didn't have to see the way it landed. "It'll be a smaller family trip this year," she said, spreading that butter real slow, like the words weren't twisting the knife in my gut with every syllable. Flights were limited. You know how expensive things are now. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at the back of her neck, the way a muscle twitched under her skin like even her body knew she was full of it. My coffee had gone cold. My appetite disappeared. There was an entire plate of pancakes in front of me, but they may as well have been rocks. I kept hearing that sentence over and over, smaller family trip, like I wasn't even family anymore. Like I was some kind of extended cousin they'd outgrown. Now, if this were the first time they pulled something like this, maybe I'd chalk it up to bad timing or budget issues or whatever else people use to excuse cruelty dressed as pragmatism. But this wasn't the first time. This was just the most obvious. The boldest. The most shameless slap in the face after a lifetime of passive-aggressive digs and backhanded compliments and getting treated like I was always one step behind the people I worked the hardest to help. I was the reliable one, the one who showed up, the one who covered bills when mom's credit cards maxed out, the one who quietly took over the mortgage when the banks started circling like vultures. The house they lived in, the one they packed up and left from that morning, was mine. Not theirs. Mine. Paid for in my name, protected by my signature, maintained by my bank account. And still they didn't see me as someone worth a seat on the goddamn plane. And here's the part that really pisses me off, the part that turned the burn into something volcanic. Mom didn't even tell me until 2 days before the trip. 2 days. Not a heads up, not an invite that fell through, not even a fake excuse to soften the blow. Just dropped it in my lap like she was telling me she needed someone to pick up milk on the way home. "It'll be a smaller family trip," she said, and I swear to God, if I didn't know any better, I would have thought she was doing me a favor. I asked her once, real calm, almost too calm, why wasn't I included? Her hands froze. She didn't even turn around, just kind of shrugged, like the answer was obvious. "We thought you might be busy with work." That was it. That was the excuse. Not that I didn't matter, not that they didn't want me around, not that my presence made things uncomfortable because I remembered things they liked to pretend never happened. Just, "We thought you might be busy." That line landed in my chest like a dull knife, and I smiled. Not because I believed it, but because something inside me clicked. They forgot something, see? Something really basic. Something they probably never thought twice about because they were too used to treating me like the doormat at the front of a house they didn't even pay for. They forgot I was the landlord. Literally. That house? The one they decorated like it was theirs, the one they made memories in, the one where they raised their voices when they argued like I didn't have to hear it through paper-thin walls. I bought it. When Mom nearly lost it 15 years ago during the recession, I drained my savings, pulled some strings with the credit union, and saved the only roof any of us had. I put the title in my name, and they moved right back in like nothing changed. No rent. No gratitude. Just a quiet, ongoing assumption that I owed them something. And I let it happen. Year after year, I let it slide because family is complicated and messy and full of silent expectations that you learn not to question if you want to keep the peace. But that morning, watching my mother fold up her lies into neat little excuses while my sister laughed from the hallway about how she forgot to pack sunscreen, it wasn't just the insult that stuck. It was the clarity. It was realizing that they didn't even see me as part of them anymore. That I was just a wallet with a face they didn't want in vacation photos. Later that afternoon, after they left in the airport shuttle without so much as a goodbye, I walked past the kitchen table and saw a piece of mail that had slid under a stack of magazines. It was addressed to current property owner, and it was from the county office. Just routine stuff, something about property tax reassessment. but it felt like a reminder. A loud one. I stood there holding that envelope, hearing my sister's voice in my head from last Christmas when she'd said, "Your lucky mom still lets you live here." That was the moment it hit me. Not only did they exclude me, they genuinely believed they were doing me a favor by staying in my house. So I went upstairs, opened my laptop, and logged into the property management portal. I sat there staring at the screen, watching the cursor blink next to the word eviction. And I clicked. Not because I wanted revenge. Not exactly. But because I was done being the backup plan they never wanted to acknowledge. I was done being the invisible one. And as the forms loaded and the legal language filled the screen, all I could think was, this family trip is about to get a hell of a lot smaller. There's something disturbingly familiar about the way people rewrite history when it no longer benefits them to remember the truth as it happened, and my family, particularly my mother and sister, had mastered that art like it was their native tongue, reshaping past events into more palatable versions where they were always the victims of circumstance, and I was merely a shadow figure, useful when needed, invisible when not. The morning after they left for their sun-soaked escape, I found myself walking through the house like a ghost haunting a space that technically belonged to me, but emotionally had been stolen from me long ago, filled with their smells, their furniture, their framed memories on walls they didn't pay for. I passed the hallway closet where they kept the beach chairs I bought 3 summers ago, an Amazon order that arrived while I was between double shifts and barely sleeping, but still managed to carry upstairs because Mom said her back hurt, and I opened the door. Not because I needed anything, but because I was looking for some proof that I had mattered at some point, some physical evidence that I wasn't imagining the years I spent bending backwards to hold this whole facade of family together. Inside were a few board games, a cracked boogie board, and an old shoebox labeled Trip 2013 with a Sharpie that had faded to a ghostly gray. I pulled it out, sat on the floor, and opened it, already knowing what I'd find. Snapshots of the Florida trip they still talked about like it was the peak of our family unity. Pictures that showed a smiling mother, a glowing Kelsey in her teens, and even Travis with his 2 white teeth and arms around both women like he was some trophy son-in-law. There I was, too, in the corners, always on the edge, holding a camera, carrying bags, never the subject, just the support. Back then, things were already slipping, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Mom was barely holding onto the house. Her job at the clinic was being downsized, and I was working 2 jobs, sometimes 3, including nights at the diner where my uniform always smelled like fryer oil no matter how much I washed it. When the foreclosure notice came in the mail, I was the one who opened it because Mom couldn't bear to do it herself. She cried, not because she was losing the house, but because she thought she'd have to tell people. What will the neighbors think? She kept asking, pacing the kitchen like reputation was more valuable than shelter. That's when I stepped in, not because I had some noble streak or delusion of family loyalty, but because I couldn't stand the idea of my little niece, barely 4 at the time, sleeping in someone's basement or bouncing between cheap rentals that smelled like mildew and regret. I used every dollar I'd saved for grad school, money I'd put away since I was 20, thinking I'd get my master's and maybe teach, maybe finally do something that made me feel like I wasn't just surviving. But dreams are easily postponed when guilt is weaponized, and Mom didn't have to say much. Just a few well-placed sighs, a couple of "I guess we'll figure it out," and suddenly, I was at the bank, signing papers I barely understood, becoming the official owner of the same house I grew up in, the same house they now referred to as the family home. Like it had been passed down through generations instead of rescued by one overworked, underappreciated daughter they never quite accepted as their own. They stayed, of course. Not a penny of rent ever exchanged hands. When I gently brought it up, once, years later, Mom looked at me like I'd slapped her. "You're not going to charge your own mother to live in her home," she said, making it sound like I was the greedy one, like I was trying to evict a widow into the street. Kelsey, naturally, backed her up. "She's done enough for us. You wouldn't even have a job if it weren't for her sacrifices." That line stung in ways I still can't fully explain because it was so far removed from reality it felt like they were gaslighting me in real time. I wanted to scream that I was the one making sacrifices, that I was the one who paid the utility bills when Mom forgot, the one who stayed up late fixing plumbing with YouTube videos because Travis said it wasn't his skill set. But I stayed quiet. Like always. Now, sitting on that hardwood floor with a box full of cherry-picked memories and a silence hanging in the air that finally felt mine, I picked up my phone. I wasn't even planning to check social media, but muscle memory brought me there, and that's when I saw it, Kelsey's latest post. A filtered photo of her and Travis in matching sunglasses, tropical drinks in hand. And that smug little caption that broke whatever part of me was still trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. Off to paradise. Just us, no drama this time. That was the word that stuck, drama. That's how they saw me now. Not family. Not sacrifice. Just drama. My stomach tightened, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt focused. I closed the photo, opened my notes app, and started writing out everything I'd tolerated for the last 15 years. Missed rent. Utility abuse. Property damage. Emotional manipulation. I wasn't going to delete it this time. I wasn't going to let guilt override logic. Because if they wanted a trip without drama, they were about to come home to a house without a home. And the best part? They wouldn't even see it coming. By the time I reached out to the lawyer, a man named Mark whom I had consulted once before during a tenant dispute with an old roommate, I already knew exactly what I wanted to do, and more importantly, what I was legally allowed to do. Because in the eyes of the law, emotion doesn't weigh nearly as much as signatures, ownership, and the thick file of documents sitting in a drawer under my bed that proved, undeniably, that I was not just a resident in that house, not just the daughter or sister, or fallback plan, but the sole legal owner, the name on every important piece of paper that meant anything when push came to shove. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the same one they used to plan their family trip, the same one where I'd once bandaged Kelsey's scraped knee when she fell off her bike, staring at the small stack of manila folders like they were loaded weapons, and realizing just how absurd it was that for years I let people live under my roof like they were doing me a favor. When I told Mark the situation, he didn't flinch, didn't question the morality, didn't even blink when I explained that my mother, sister, and brother-in-law had gone on vacation without telling me and that I wanted them served before they landed back home. He asked a few procedural questions. Did they pay rent? No. Was there a lease agreement? Of course not. How long had they lived there? Too long. And then he paused for a moment before saying, in that perfectly neutral legal tone that somehow made the absurd sound rational, then yes, Rachel, you are within your rights to serve them notice for eviction. Just give me the details. And so I did. I gave him everything, every petty detail, every ignored boundary, every forgotten birthday, every time they borrowed money and never paid it back, every moment they made me feel like an unwanted guest in the home I bought with blood, sweat, and dreams I had to bury to make it all possible. But Mark didn't need all that. What he needed was the paperwork, the signatures, the cold facts that made justice possible, and I gave him all of it without blinking. By the end of that day, the notices were being prepared, and I had scheduled the delivery for the exact day their return flight landed, 3 days from now. 3 days. That number kept echoing in my head like a countdown, not to an explosion, but to a quiet unraveling of an illusion that had held my family together with nothing more than denial and obligation. I spent the next afternoon cleaning the house, not in a cathartic, spring-cleaning kind of way, but with precision, with the kind of focus that comes from knowing something is finally shifting in your favor after years of swallowing rage and walking on eggshells. I went through every shared drawer, every forgotten closet, every drawer they thought was theirs by divine right, and I pulled out mail addressed to them, old receipts, empty shampoo bottles, things they would leave behind that might give them an excuse to return. And I packed it all into cardboard boxes, labeling them with a coldness I didn't know I had in me. I stacked them in the garage like a moving company had already been hired. And then, just because I could, I opened the Wi-Fi app on my phone and disconnected every device that wasn't mine. The router blinked, the lights shifted, and for the first time, I felt like I was flipping the switch on years of passive suffering. Later that evening, I went upstairs to my old bedroom, still mine, though rarely respected as such, and sat on the bed with my laptop open. I logged into the property management portal where I paid taxes and utilities, and something about seeing my name on every bill filled me with a strange combination of anger and relief. Anger, because it was always there, in black and white, while they treated me like a child living off their grace. Relief, because I now had every justification I needed, not just to reclaim what was mine, but to do it without apologies. The next morning, I received a text from Travis. Just one line. "Hey, the Wi-Fi isn't working? Any idea?" No greeting. No warmth. Just the assumption that I was still the house tech support, the backup generator, the fixer, the invisible janitor of their entitled lives. I stared at the message for a full minute before replying, simply, "Not sure. I'll look into it." I didn't lie. I just didn't elaborate. That afternoon, while they were probably sipping cocktails under palm trees and laughing about their drama-free getaway, the process server delivered the eviction notice to the front door. Taped it right where the "Bless This Home" wooden sign used to hang until Kelsey decided it clashed with her new, modern aesthetic. I wasn't there when it happened, but I imagined the quiet echo of papers fluttering in the wind, the way silence filled a house right before everything changes. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was second-guessing my decision, no, that part felt disturbingly easy, but because I kept replaying old conversations in my head, moments when I tried to speak up and was shut down with a look or a laugh or, worse, silence. I thought about the Thanksgiving 2 years ago when I asked Kelsey to help with dishes, and she said, "Isn't that your job, since you don't really cook?" I thought about the way Travis always called me kiddo, even though he was 2 years younger, or how Mom used to remind me, gently but firmly, that Kelsey's always had more on her plate, as if that excused everything. By morning, the storm had quieted inside me. There was no guilt left. Just anticipation. Because in 2 more days, they'd be back. And for once, I wouldn't be waiting with open arms or passive acceptance. I'd be waiting with boundaries, legal ones, enforceable ones, undeniable ones. And this time, no amount of tears or guilt-tripping or selective memory was going to change a damn thing. When the day of their return finally came, it began with an overcast sky that hung low and heavy, like even the weather could sense something ugly was about to unfold, and I remember standing in the hallway near the front door, listening to the quiet ticking of the old wall clock that had belonged to my grandmother, the only woman in our family who had ever spoken her mind without fear of being branded difficult, dramatic, or unstable. I thought of her often that morning, how she would have handled this mess if she'd still been alive, and while I had no delusions of comparing myself to her strength, I allowed myself a flicker of satisfaction at the thought that she might have understood what I was about to do, and more importantly, why I had to do it. The locks had been changed 3 days ago, the paperwork had been filed, and their belongings, every last box, every neglected shoe, every bit of clothing that they had scattered throughout the house like territorial markers, had been moved to the garage, stacked neatly in labeled boxes with a precision that made even me uncomfortable, not because it was cruel, but because it was so coldly efficient, so disturbingly organized that it made the finality of everything feel inescapable. There would be no begging their way out of this, no last-minute guilt trip, no teary monologue from Mom about how family sticks together even when things get messy, because this time the only thing sticking was the notice pinned to the inside of the glass front door, visible through the window like a final word carved into stone. They landed that afternoon, and by 5 o'clock, Travis was already calling my phone, his name lighting up the screen like a warning siren I had learned long ago to ignore. I didn't answer, not because I was trying to be vindictive, but because I knew exactly what that conversation would sound like, the faux confusion, the passive-aggressive tone, the thinly veiled threats disguised as jokes. And I wasn't in the mood to hear his voice twist this into something he could control. A few minutes later, Kelsey texted, the tone shifting between shock and entitlement in a matter of sentences. "Why can't we get into the house? The key doesn't work? Is this a mistake or something?" Followed almost immediately by, "This better not be some kind of sick joke, Rachel." I didn't reply to that one either. Instead, I walked out to the end of the driveway, leaned against the mailbox, and waited. 15 minutes later, their car pulled up, Mom in the front passenger seat, wearing oversized sunglasses and that familiar expression of manufactured concern, Kelsey looking furious, and Travis, of course, trying to look like he was in charge of the situation, his jaw set in that stupid way he always did when he thought posture could replace logic. They got out of the car slowly, cautiously, like approaching a crime scene, and it was Kelsey who spoke first, her voice laced with disbelief and rage all at once. "Rachel, what the hell is going on? Why is the house locked?" I didn't move from my spot. I just pointed toward the garage without saying a word. Her eyes followed my gesture, and when she saw the stacks of boxes through the slightly raised door, her mouth fell open. "Are you serious right now?" she snapped, storming up the driveway. "You went through our stuff? You packed up our lives while we were gone." Travis followed behind her, less theatrical, more calculating, like he was trying to figure out what angle he could exploit to fix this without losing too much ground. Mom stayed by the car, her arms folded across her chest, and for once, she didn't speak. Not yet. I finally looked Kelsey in the eye, my voice steady and quiet, too quiet for the amount of noise they were making. "You don't live here anymore," I said. "You were never tenants. You had no lease, no agreement, no rent history. Legally, you were squatters, and now you've been served notice. You have 72 hours to remove your things or I call a clean-out crew." Her mouth opened and closed, stunned into temporary silence, and Travis stepped forward like he was stepping in for the weak, ready to speak for her, because that's what he always did, be the voice of reason only when it suited him. "This is insane," he said, shaking his head like the ground rules of reality had suddenly changed, and he was the only one not given a handbook. "You could have talked to us first. You could have given us a warning." I let out a dry laugh, one that carried every bit of bitterness I'd swallowed for over a decade. "You mean like the warning you gave me before you left me out of the family trip? The heads up you gave me when you decided I wasn't worth including? You're mad because I made a decision without telling you? Welcome to my life." Mom finally stepped forward then, her voice low but heavy with that guilt-laced tone she used like a scalpel. "Rachel, this isn't the way to handle family issues. We could have sat down and talked this out. You didn't have to go behind our backs." It was almost laughable, how easily she could accuse me of going behind their backs when they'd excluded me from everything for years, reducing me to an afterthought until they needed a favor or a bailout or a place to live. I turned to her slowly, taking in the sight of the woman who raised me, who loved me in that conditional, inconsistent way that left more scars than bruises. "I tried to talk," I said. "I tried for years. But none of you were listening. You only ever heard what you wanted to hear." For a long moment, no one said anything. Kelsey stood frozen, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Travis looked like he was calculating the odds of any legal loophole, and Mom, for once, looked older than I'd ever seen her, less composed, less in control. She blinked slowly, as if trying to make sense of a world that no longer bent to her expectations. I handed them each a copy of the notice, printed and stapled and sealed in envelopes. "You've got until Sunday," I said. "After that, I call the locksmith again, and whatever's left goes to donation or the trash. Don't call me. Don't try to come in. The locks are changed, the cameras are on, and the police are already aware of the situation. This isn't a negotiation." Mom opened her mouth again, maybe to plead, maybe to accuse, but I didn't wait. I turned, walked back into the house, and closed the door behind me. The sound of the lock sliding into place was sharper than I expected, like punctuation at the end of a sentence that had taken too long to finish. And then the voicemail started. The voicemails came in waves, a crescendo of desperation layered over guilt and denial, each one more frayed and emotionally splintered than the last, beginning with polite confusion, then stumbling into carefully packaged outrage, and eventually collapsing into teary monologues that somehow still managed to avoid acknowledging the truth of what had happened, as though if they refused to say it outright, they could undo it by sheer force of will. I didn't listen to them right away, not because I was being petty, And not because I wanted them to suffer, but because I needed space, real space, the kind I'd never had while living in the echo chamber of a family that only knew how to talk at me, never to me. It wasn't until Sunday morning, when the 72-hour clock was nearly out, that I finally played the last voicemail. It was from Kelsey, and her voice cracked on the second word, not the way it usually did when she was performing sadness for sympathy, but with something that almost sounded real, almost too raw to be rehearsed. "Rachel," she whispered, her breath catching like she was trying not to cry or maybe trying too hard to make me hear it. "We're at the motel off 3rd, the one with the broken vending machine and the weird smell in the hallways. Travis, he's not handling this well. And Mom, I don't know. She just sits there. I can't get her to eat. Look, I know we messed up, okay? I know we should have told you about the trip. I know we should have treated you better, but this feels permanent. Like we're not coming back from this. Can we just talk?" I played it twice, then a third time, not because I needed to hear the words again, but because part of me kept searching for some detail. Some trace of sincerity that might have softened the hardened part of me that had spent too long being polite while bleeding out emotionally behind closed doors. I sat at the kitchen table, the one that used to be surrounded by people who barely noticed me, and for the first time, I was alone there by choice and not because I'd been left out. The silence was different now. It wasn't oppressive. It was peaceful. Mine. I stood and walked toward the garage, opened the door, and looked at the remaining boxes, 3 of them unclaimed, marked with names and contents that told stories far longer than the scribbled Sharpie labels could convey. There was Mom's old recipe binder, the one she hadn't touched in years, but always claimed was the heart of the home, buried under a dusty set of candle holders and chipped porcelain she refused to throw away. One of the boxes had Kelsey's name on it in bold strokes, her wedding heels, still in their satin case, a half-used bottle of perfume, and a folder with her daughter's school art projects, yellowing at the edges. I closed the box and sat down beside it, running my fingers over the edge of the cardboard, wondering how many more pieces of myself I'd let go before this whole thing started to feel like healing instead of punishment. Then the phone rang. I let it ring 3 times before I answered, not because I was building suspense, but because I honestly didn't know what I was going to say when I finally heard her voice again. Kelsey spoke first, soft, almost afraid of being heard. "Rachel, thank you for answering. I didn't think you would." For a long moment, I didn't respond. I just listened to the sound of her breathing on the other end, that fragile rhythm that told me she wasn't calling to fight, not this time. "What do you want, Kelsey?" I finally asked, my voice low but clear, stronger than I remembered it ever sounding when we used to argue in hushed tones so Mom wouldn't get upset. "I want to come home," she said, and just like that, the ache returned, not because of what she said, but because of what it meant. Home. As if that word had ever meant the same thing to both of us. As if we'd been standing on the same ground this whole time, just with different shoes on. "Travis lost his job last month," she continued, her voice faltering. "He didn't want to tell anyone. We've been struggling and the trip was supposed to be, I don't know, a break? Mom said not to tell you, that it would just make things worse, but I should have. I know I should have. You didn't deserve that." There was a long pause, not from awkwardness, but from the weight of all the things that had never been said. And then I heard it, a smaller voice in the background, a little girl's voice, my niece. "Mommy, I'm cold." Just those 3 words. That's all. But it punched the breath right out of me because for a moment, the lines of revenge blurred, and all I could hear was a child who had no idea what she was caught in the middle of. I stood, walked back to the kitchen window, and stared out at the street, the same street where Kelsey and I had once learned to ride bikes together, where I skinned my knees while she coasted ahead without looking back. "You can pick up your things," I said finally, my voice even. "That's all I can offer right now." "Is that it?" she asked, quiet, wounded, but not surprised. "For now," I said. "This isn't about punishing you. It's about protecting me. Something I should have done years ago." She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She just whispered, "Okay," and hung up. I stayed by the window for a long time after the call ended, watching the sun slowly fall behind the rooflines, the last light of day catching in the blinds like threads of gold. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt unburdened, not healed, not forgiven, just lighter. Later that night, I walked to the mailbox and pulled out a new envelope, thick and crisp, addressed to me. It was an offer from a real estate investor. They wanted to buy the house. The number they offered was almost double what I paid years ago. I held the paper in my hands, feeling the weight of the future pressing against the past. Inside, my phone lit up again. More missed calls. More messages. All of them begging to talk, to explain, to start over. I stood in the hallway, staring at that phone, and for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar pull to fix everything, to smooth it over, to return to the role they had written for me. I thought of Grandma again, the way she once told me, some people only want you around when you're quiet enough to disappear. This time, I didn't disappear. This time, I stayed exactly where I was. And for once, that was enough.